The galaxy was ancient, filled with empires that had risen and fallen like the tides of distant suns. In that vast sea of civilizations, where cruelty was currency and domination the language of power, few ever pondered the notion of mercy. It was an alien concept, fragile, illogical, and wasteful in the eyes of those who ruled by force. The HFY Dominion, oldest and most ruthless among them, considered mercy not just weakness, but treason against survival itself. For over 2,000 cycles, the HFY had carved their empire through blood and iron, reducing worlds to ash in the name of progress. Their laws were efficient, their punishments absolute. They believed peace existed only when every voice but theirs was silenced. Yet, in all their archives, spanning billions of years of conquest, one species haunted their history like a ghost story whispered by old admirals after battles: humans. The records were fragmented, corroded by time and war. A single encounter, fleeting and unresolved, with a primitive species from a small blue world orbiting an unremarkable yellow star. The HFY had sent a survey fleet, expecting easy submission or extinction. What they found was something else. Humanity had not yet mastered faster-than-light travel, yet their defiance burned brighter than any sun. When the HFY demanded obedience, the humans answered with resistance, reckless, doomed, but terrifyingly pure. The HFY annihilated their fleet and left, dismissing the encounter as trivial. But the logs from that expedition contained one final note, scrawled by the mission commander moments before his ship vanished. They fight without logic. They fight because they believe. For centuries, those words were a curiosity, a philosophical oddity quoted by scholars who enjoyed dissecting dead species. Humanity faded into myth, a cautionary tale about passion overwhelming reason. Until, one day, the myth woke up. It began with ripples in subspace, faint signals, encrypted and ancient. The HFY Dominion's deep space relays detected transmissions using long-forgotten Terran codes. At first, the Dominion laughed. Relics, they said, old ghosts of a dead race. But then the signals grew stronger, more deliberate, pulsing across sectors that had been abandoned for centuries. When HFY scouts followed the trail, they found not ruins, but living worlds, green, vibrant, and unmistakably human. Cities under glass domes shimmered with light. Massive orbital rings turned in perfect synchronization. And above them all, the Terran Confederation banner drifted. A black field with a single blue circle, the symbol of Earth. The HFY did not understand what they were seeing. How could the primitives they once dismissed have spread across so many systems? The Dominion had watched countless species rise, only to fall beneath their heel. Yet humanity had endured, in silence, outside the eyes of galactic politics. The HFY studied them in secret. They saw humans sending ships filled not with soldiers, but with settlers, artists, and engineers. They built colonies where others built fortresses. They helped weaker races instead of enslaving them. And the HFY laughed again. They pity their enemies, said Chancellor Varric Kell, his voice echoing across the grand chamber of the Dominion citadel. They mourn those they conquer. They are too soft to rule. But that laughter died the day the Eridani Prime colonies burned. The HFY called it a demonstration, a warning to remind the galaxy who held power. 8 human worlds turned to glass within hours, their populations reduced to ash. Entire generations perished in silence. The HFY expected a war, but no declaration came. No fleets mobilized, no threats followed. Only quiet. The kind of quiet that made even the stars seem to hold their breath. Weeks passed, then months. The galaxy watched, waiting for humanity's reaction. When none came, they assumed the Terrans had been broken. cowed into submission by the overwhelming power of the Dominion. Varek Kell basked in the illusion of victory, proclaiming to the council, "See how their mercy saves them now." The Dominion celebrated. But somewhere deep in the void, among the shattered remains of Eridani Prime, something stirred. A single transmission broke the silence, faint, calm, and unmistakably human. It was a woman's voice, spoken in perfect Threxian dialect. "You took 8 worlds," she said. "We will take your certainty." Then the signal vanished. At first, the Threx believed it to be a hoax, a desperate act of defiance by refugees. Yet, over the next few days, things began to unravel. Listening posts went dark. Patrol fleets disappeared without a trace. The Dominion's navigation beacons began transmitting human music, soft, haunting melodies echoing through subspace. Threx scientists tore apart their systems trying to locate the interference. They couldn't. The encryption was flawless, beautiful in its simplicity. It didn't destroy their data. It rewrote it. Every record of Threx victories over other species began to change, the names replaced with human ones. Every reference to conquest now read, "Mercy requested, justice pending." Panic spread across the Dominion's High Council. Some called for a counterstrike. Others urged caution. Varek Kell dismissed both sides. "They are playing psychological games," he said. "They lack the will to face us directly." But even he couldn't ignore what happened next. One morning, the stars above the Threx capital flickered. 12 ships appeared, massive, silent, and unlike any known configuration. They bore Terran markings, but their hulls were black as void, absorbing light itself. They didn't broadcast warnings. They didn't answer hails. They simply waited. And for the first time in its long, merciless history, the Threx Dominion hesitated. The galaxy held its breath. Every world, every species, every ruler who had ever mocked the notion of human mercy watched the dark Terran fleet hanging above the most powerful empire known, silent, motionless, and waiting. They had no idea that this was not an invasion. It was a judgment. Humanity had come not to destroy, but to show the galaxy what true mercy looked like, not as kindness, but as consequence. Mercy was not the absence of wrath. It was the patience of a species that had seen the worst of itself and learned to hold its fire. And that, more than any weapon, was what terrified the galaxy most. For when the humans finally spoke again, the words would not come from rage or vengeance. They would come from justice. And when humanity spoke justice, entire empires listened. The Dominion's inner core burned with unease. For millennia, they had faced rebellion, extinction events, and countless wars, each crushed beneath their iron fleets. But never before had they encountered silence as a weapon. The 12 Terran ships did not move. They did not threaten. They simply existed, suspended in orbit above the Threx homeworld, like ancient sentinels carved from the void itself. Their surfaces shimmered with faint electromagnetic distortion, absorbing sensor pulses and reflecting none. Every attempt to scan them returned static, as if the ships themselves rejected the concept of being known. From the Grand Chamber of Command, Chancellor Varek Kell watched the live feed projected across 1,000 hollow panels. His taloned hands clenched the sides of his throne, the ridges of his skull pulsing with restrained fury. "Are they mocking us?" he demanded. The counselors surrounding him, generals, technocrats, ministers, shifted uneasily, exchanging nervous glances. "Our scans cannot penetrate their shielding," replied Admiral Sarton, the Dominion's highest naval strategist. The composition of their hulls defies analysis, whatever it's made from. "It's not on our periodic tables," finished another. Varric hissed softly, a sound that silenced the room. "You're telling me, after 5,000 cycles of dominion over this galaxy, our sciences cannot explain primitive Terran metal?" The Admiral hesitated, then bowed his head. "It is not primitive, Chancellor. Whatever those ships are, they are beyond even our theoretical constructs." The council chamber erupted in a low murmur. Words like dark matter resonance and quantum compression fields rippled through the ranks of Threx scientists, their minds grasping for understanding. But the truth was far simpler and far more terrifying. The ships did not belong to this era. They were old, ancient. Humanity had built them not as weapons of conquest, but as monuments to restraint. They were known, in the forgotten records of the Confederacy, as the custodians of the line. Vessels designed to enforce one principle: never again would humanity be erased. For centuries, they slept in the void, orbiting uninhabited systems, forgotten even by the descendants of Earth. Until Eridani burned. Until mercy was tested one time too many. Then their protocols awoke. But the Threx didn't know that. To them, the ships were ghosts, an affront to their authority. "We should strike now," barked General Vrain, commander of the planetary defense grid. "We can saturate orbit with plasma bombardment. Even if our weapons cannot pierce their shields, we will force them to respond." "And if they do?" came a quiet voice from the far end of the chamber. The speaker was Minister Talaren, a historian by trade, and one of the few among the Dominion's leadership who still remembered the old stories. "You do not know what they are capable of. You mock them because you think they are like us. But they are not." Varric glared at her. "You speak as though they are gods." "No," Talaren said softly. "Just humans. And that should concern you more." The silence that followed was broken only by the faint hum of the chamber's power conduits. Varric waved a claw dismissively. "Your words are superstition. I will not yield to ghost stories." He turned to his generals. "Deploy our first armada. Encircle them. I want their ships dismantled, piece by piece, and their captains dragged before me." The orders went out within the hour. Across the Threx homeworld's orbital grid, the full strength of the Dominion's navy mobilized. Thousands of warships ignited their engines, forming into precision attack patterns. Their plasma cannons charged, glowing like miniature suns against the backdrop of space. Every ship broadcast a single message to the Terran fleet: surrender or be annihilated. No response came. Minutes stretched into hours. The Dominion waited, impatient and uneasy. Then, as if in answer, the 12 Terran vessels shifted formation, just slightly. Their movement was not aggressive, not even defensive. It was choreographed, graceful, perfect. They aligned into a pattern that none of the Threx analysts recognized, until Talaren gasped softly, eyes widening. "It's not a battle formation," she whispered. "It's a symbol." "A symbol of what?" snapped Varric. "The human word for it is—" She hesitated, her translator struggling to find an equivalent. "Judgment." Then the light changed. It began with a flicker, a faint pulse radiating from the lead Terran ship. The Dominion sensors registered it as harmless electromagnetic interference, but when the wave hit, every Threx vessel shuddered. Systems blinked, sensors failed, engines powered down. It wasn't an attack in the traditional sense. There was no heat, no impact, no radiation. It was something deeper. The pulse reached into the very data structures of the Dominion's fleet and rewrote them. Command codes dissolved. Identification markers scrambled. The targeting systems of every ship suddenly displayed the same horrifying message. Recognition error. Cannot distinguish ally from enemy. Panic erupted. Captains screamed orders into failing comms as their ships drifted aimlessly, weapons useless, engines dead. On the surface, the Threx capital watched in disbelief as its mighty armada, the pride of 10,000 years, fell silent above them. And still, the humans did not fire. The 12 ships simply hovered there, their black hulls gleaming faintly in the light of the Threx sun. The message was clear, and it spread across the galaxy in whispers. Humanity had returned, and it did not need to fight to win. It only needed to speak. The other empires watched in terror. The Arenic Syndicate, the Zell Republic, the countless independent systems, all remembered the legends. Humanity had once wielded technology that bordered on sorcery. Their rage had forged weapons that could unmake stars. But no one had ever spoken of their restraint. No one understood that the most dangerous thing about humanity was not their violence, but the line they refused to cross, until someone forced them to. And now, standing before the most brutal empire in the galaxy, the line had been crossed. Varric Kell stared at the dead screens surrounding him. For the first time in his reign, he felt something he could not define, something colder than fear, heavier than shame. The humans had not destroyed his fleet. They had shown him what mercy truly looked like, power held in check. It was a lesson, a warning, and a promise. For in the silence between wars, mercy becomes judgment, and judgment, once spoken by humanity, could not be recalled. The first voice to break the silence came not from the Dominion, but from the Terran vessel that had taken position at the center of the human formation. Its comms transmission did not blast across channels or burn through encryption. It simply appeared, as though it had always been there, woven into the Dominion's communications network since before its creation. Every Threx monitor, every personal data link, every military channel flickered, and then a voice echoed across the void. Calm, steady, ageless. "This is the custodian of Earth," it said. "You have violated the covenant of mercy. Stand down." The words hung like a blade in the air. On the bridge of the Dominion's flagship, Varric Kell rose to his full height, his scaled armor glinting under the crimson lights. "Covenant of mercy?" he hissed. "There is no such covenant recognized by the Dominion." But deep down, beneath his defiance, he felt a memory stir. The Threx archives, ancient texts sealed even from the Chancellor himself, spoke of the old accord. It had been written in the early centuries after the First Contact Wars, when humanity, broken yet victorious, had gathered the scattered races and imposed a single rule upon the galaxy, that no species would again commit the sin of annihilation. That was the Covenant of Mercy, a pact signed in blood and fear, overseen by the Terrans themselves. That covenant had been forgotten. Humanity had vanished into myth. And yet, here they stood, 12 ships bearing the insignia of the old accord, now awoken from the tombs of the void. The custodian's voice spoke again, soft but unyielding. "We watched you from the dark. You took their children. You burned their seas. You called it justice. You called it progress. But mercy was given to you once, and you have squandered it." On the Threx capital world, the citizens watched in terror as the sky darkened. The Terran ships had activated their lower emitters, vast lattice arrays that shimmered faintly in orbit. They were not weapons, not in the conventional sense. They were mirrors, projecting the Dominion's own atrocities across the sky for every citizen to see. The images were unmistakable: colonies reduced to ash, alien corpses buried in glassed soil, the screams of conquered species echoing through time. Every sin the Dominion had hidden beneath propaganda and censorship now unfolded above them in light. Varric roared, slamming his claws against the command table. "Disable those projections! I will not have my people poisoned by Terran lies!" "Chancellor," said Minister Toleren softly, her eyes fixed on the images, "these are not fabrications. The data signatures, they match our own archives. These are ours." Her voice trembled with the weight of realization. The Terrans had not merely found evidence, they had stolen the Dominion's own records. They had read their conscience. Varric turned on her, furious. "You think these humans have the right to judge us? We brought unity to the stars." Toleren met his gaze, and for the first time she did not flinch. "No, Chancellor, you brought fear." Above them, the human voice continued its quiet litany. "When you burned Eridani Prime, our colonies did not answer. When you enslaved the Dallin tribes, our fleets did not stir. We believed you would learn compassion in silence. But compassion without conscience is cowardice. And so we return, not as conquerors, but as witnesses." The Dominion's networks began to collapse one by one, not through attack, but through shame. Systems self-terminated, AI cores went dormant, and even the propaganda nodes went dark, overwhelmed by a single data stream: the truth. Admiral Sarton, still aboard the fleet flagship, stared at his dead controls. "What do they want from us?" he whispered. The custodian answered, though no one had spoken. "We want you to remember what it means to choose mercy. For when mercy is taken for weakness, justice follows." And then the first change began. From orbit, the Terran ships released a slow cascade of light, descending through the atmosphere like falling stars. They drifted gently, harmlessly, and when they touched the surface, the Dominion's war foundries, those vast engines of death that had churned for centuries, simply stopped. Their reactors shut down, their forges cooled. Their automatic drones froze in place, their targeting systems erased. But again, the Terrans did not destroy. They dismantled the machinery of oppression with surgical precision, leaving the people unharmed. It was a message as old as war itself. Humanity had mastered destruction, yet chose restraint. The lesson was clear: power was never the enemy. The absence of conscience was. In the lower levels of the capital city, a Threx worker named Kareth watched as the skies shimmered with Terran light. His hands, long scarred from years of servitude, trembled. "Is it over?" he asked, voice barely a whisper. A nearby elder, his eyes reflecting the images in the heavens, nodded slowly. "No," he said, "it is only beginning. The humans do not bring death, they bring reckoning." Meanwhile, aboard the lead Terran ship, the custodian of Earth, Captain Leora Vance stood before the main viewport. Her face was still, emotionless, though her eyes burned with quiet grief. Around her, the bridge hummed with restrained energy. She turned to her second officer. "Transmit the final verdict." The officer hesitated. "Captain, if we do this, the Dominion will never recover. It will collapse entirely." Leora's voice was steady, but her expression faltered, just slightly. "That is not for us to decide. They wrote their judgment long before we arrived." She looked out at the planet below. "Begin transmission." And then, across the stars, her voice was heard. "To all sentient nations, let it be known that the covenant of mercy has been violated. The Xor'Tal Dominion stands in breach of the law of life. Their conquests end this day. Their victims will be freed. Their leaders will answer not to our vengeance, but to their own truth. Humanity does not seek war. Humanity seeks balance." The message was received on every world that had ever known the Dominion's shadow. In hidden refugee colonies, in slave camps buried beneath alien suns, in shattered fleets adrift in forgotten space, millions looked up as the transmission played. The tone was not triumphant. It was mournful. And in that moment, the galaxy realized something terrifyingly beautiful. Humanity did not return for conquest. It returned because no one else would stand for justice. Back on the Xor'Tal's capital, Varric Kell sank slowly into his throne. His defiance had fled. The skies above his world burned with the memories of his empire's sins. And somewhere deep in his mind, he understood that this was not an ending. It was the beginning of a world that would never again mistake mercy for weakness. The Custodian's fleet remained in orbit, silent and still, like 12 eternal judges watching the rebirth of conscience. Humanity had spoken. Justice had begun. Silence ruled the Dominion's capital for 3 full rotations after the Custodian's final transmission. What had once been a world of fire and steel, an empire's heart that pulsed with pride and brutality, now sat beneath a sky filled with drifting light. The human ships did not leave. They hung in orbit like cold, patient gods, their mirrored hulls reflecting the broken clouds and the scarred lands beneath. Their presence was not a siege, it was a sentence. And the Dominion, for the first time in its long and cruel history, could feel the weight of its own sins pressing inward like gravity. Across the surface, cities lay paralyzed. The citizens, conditioned to obedience, awaited commands that never came. Broadcast towers had fallen silent, military grids lay dormant, and the once feared banners of the Dominion, black suns emblazoned with jagged red sigils, wilted under the winds. Chancellor Varric Kell had not spoken since the transmission. He sat in the council chamber. The walls cracked from a quake caused not by human weapons, but by their own failing reactors. The Dominion's great machine of conquest had begun eating itself. Automated factories, deprived of their central control AI, began to malfunction, turning raw ore into useless slag. Drone armies stood frozen in perfect ranks, blind to orders that no longer existed. Minister Talaren entered quietly, her steps echoing in the vast, empty chamber. The once grand hall was strewn with the debris of broken pride, ceremonial armor, torn banners, shattered relics of victory. She carried no weapon, no insignia, only a small datapad glowing faintly in the dim light. "Chancellor," she said softly, "the people are starving. The supply chains have collapsed. Entire provinces are without power. The fleet refuses to engage. They believe it is over." Varric's gaze lifted slowly, his crimson eyes hollow. And what would you have me do, Minister? Beg the humans for mercy? They are not here for vengeance, Tala replied. They have made that clear. They want us to see what we've become, to make us remember. Remember? Varric's voice rose, bitter and jagged. I remember our cities burning when the old worlds fell. I remember the chaos before the Dominion. We brought order to a galaxy drowning in weakness. Tala's expression did not change. And in bringing order, you built your throne on bones. The Chancellor stood, his cloak dragging through the dust. The strong rule, Tala. That is nature. That is law. No, she whispered, stepping closer. That was fear, and humanity has just reminded us of what law truly means. Varric turned toward the shattered window. Above, one of the Terran ships passed slowly across the upper atmosphere, its silhouette blotting out the sun. Its engines did not burn. They glowed like steady embers, pulsing in rhythm with the planet's magnetic field. It was as though the ship itself breathed with the world. He clenched his jaw. They have no right. They vanished from the stars centuries ago. They abandoned the galaxy to chaos, and now they return to judge us? Tala's voice trembled. Perhaps they waited because they knew we would need judgment. Far below them, in the lower districts, the people had begun to change. The Dominion citizens, once terrified, conditioned, obedient, now found themselves looking upward, not in fear, but in awe. The human ships projected images across the skyline, not destruction, but history. They showed the founding of the Dominion, the early wars, the rise of tyranny. And beside those images, they showed the faces of the conquered, the forgotten, the erased, the silenced. Every lie the Dominion had told them was unraveling in real time. In the markets, workers whispered prayers not to the Chancellor, but to the old spirits of the stars. In the barracks, soldiers lowered their weapons. One by one, the Dominion's colonies began transmitting surrender codes, not to the Chancellor's fleet, but directly to the Terran custodian. And still, the humans said nothing. No retaliation, no occupation. Only quiet surveillance, watching, recording, waiting. Their silence was unbearable. The Dominion had been built on conflict, on resistance and rebellion. To be met with nothing but stillness was like staring into a mirror and seeing the monster one had become. On the fourth night, Varric convened his remaining war council. Only 7 of the 30 high generals arrived. The rest were missing. Some fled, some executed by their own mutinous subordinates, and others simply gone. Their ships vanished in the chaos. Enough, Varric declared. If they refuse to speak, we will force them. They think us broken, but we are not beasts to be judged like children. General Vaskel, the last commander of the outer fleets, stepped forward. His mandibles clicked nervously. Chancellor, with respect, our fleets cannot move. The Terrans have locked every system from orbit. Our reactors are cold. Even the communication relays are infected with their code. Then rebuild them, Varric shouted. If they can silence our ships, we will roar with our voices. The Dominion will not kneel. But even as he spoke, he knew it was hollow. The Empire was gone. His words were smoke against the cold. Tala looked at him sadly. You cannot fight silence with noise. They've stripped away everything that made us powerful, and in doing so, shown what remains. Fear, guilt, emptiness. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then, far above the planet, a sound filled the air. Not a weapons charge, but something older, deeper, a vibration that resonated through the bones of the world. It was the human ships, each one releasing a pulse of harmonic energy that rippled through the atmosphere. Citizens froze, staring up at the skies as the light cascaded in patterns across the horizon. Varek's voice broke into a whisper. "What are they doing?" Tala's datapad flashed with a decoded signal. They're transmitting to everyone, every species, every world the Dominion has conquered. And then humanity spoke, not with words, but through song. A slow, haunting resonance filled the galaxy. It was the voice of Earth, layered in thousands of human tongues, echoing through the vacuum, the melody both mournful and resolute. It spoke of loss, of endurance, of rising from ruin and choosing compassion over conquest. For the first time in galactic history, every sentient being heard the same song at once. Even the Dominion's soldiers dropped their weapons. Even the children in the slums paused their cries. The galaxy listened, and the Dominion wept. On the command deck, Varek fell to his knees, hands trembling. "Why?" he rasped. "Why would they show us this? They could have destroyed us." Tala looked out through the window, her eyes glistening. "Because they remember what it means to forgive, Chancellor, and they want us to remember what it means to change." At that moment, the Terran ships began to depart. One by one, they vanished into subspace, leaving behind only trails of faint silver light that lingered like the ghosts of fallen stars. They left no demand, no declaration, no ultimatum. Only silence, and a galaxy that would never be the same again. The Dominion had fallen not by force of arms, but by the unbearable weight of its own reflection. And in the ruins of tyranny, the whispers began again, not of fear, but of hope. For the first time, the people spoke the forbidden name with reverence rather than dread. Humanity. The name that once meant myth, now meant something more. It meant conscience. It meant justice. It meant the fire that could cleanse without burning, that could destroy without hate. And as the last Terran light faded beyond the clouds, even the stars seemed to bow. In the years that followed, the galaxy remembered the day the Dominion fell, not as the end of an empire, but as the beginning of an awakening. The event became known across the star systems as the Silence of Earth. It was not a silence of absence, nor of weakness, but one of unbearable truth. Humanity had spoken, and then left without a single demand, leaving behind only the echo of their presence, a haunting mirror that forced every species to confront its own reflection. The Dominion's core worlds, once ruled by fear and endless conquest, transformed into something unrecognizable. The black banners of tyranny were torn down, not by the humans, but by the very citizens who once raised them high. It began in the underlevels of the capital, where the poorest lived, where the weight of the Dominion's cruelty had been felt the longest. There, an elderly mechanic named Risha, who had once repaired the armored walkers that crushed rebellions, stood before her people and spoke the forbidden words. We were wrong. That simple confession spread faster than any uprising had ever managed to. In the factories, workers painted over the sigils of conquest. In the academies, scholars began to speak of the old histories that had been erased. Children learned not of the Dominion's triumphs, but of the lost world called Earth. No one had seen a human since the departure of the Custodian's fleet. No transmission, no beacon, no signature. They had vanished once again into the deep void from which they came. And yet, their absence was louder than any presence. It was as though the stars themselves whispered reminders in every quiet hour. The Dominion scientists, once obsessed with domination through knowledge, now dedicated their brilliance to understanding the harmonics left behind by the Terran ships. The song that had echoed through the skies, the choral of Earth, became a sacred subject of study. They discovered that the frequencies within the signal carried encrypted mathematical sequences, maps not to coordinates, but to ideals, balance, empathy, unity. Humanity had not given them a location to find, they had given them a direction to grow. From the ashes of tyranny rose something fragile but radiant. The Galactic Assembly was born, a coalition not of rulers but of voices. No throne, no emperor, no dominion. Each species sent delegates, not based on power, but on contribution to peace. The very idea was madness to the old guard. But the people remembered the song. They remembered the light. Chancellor Varric Kell did not live to see it. In the final months of the old regime, as the last vestiges of control crumbled, he walked into the Great Council chamber alone. The transmission logs later recovered from his personal terminal revealed his final words. "If the strong are meant to rule, then humanity has shown us what strength truly is: restraint." His body was never found, though some claimed to have seen him among the refugee colonies, stripped of title and armor, working the soil beside those he once condemned. Minister Talleyrand became a central figure in the reconstruction. It was she who drafted the first articles of the Assembly's Constitution. And in its opening lines, she wrote words that would define the next millennium. "Let our strength be measured not in conquest, but in how we rise from the shadow of what we were." Yet not all could accept this peace. Beyond the Assembly's borders, fragments of the old Dominion fleet lingered in the void. Rogue admirals, unrepentant warlords, broken zealots who refused to let go of the Empire's pride. They called themselves the Remnant, and they whispered that humanity's silence was not mercy, but a curse, that the Terrans had left traps in their systems, that their song carried a hidden code waiting to ignite. Fear was a powerful thing, and the Remnant fed on it. They struck at colonies and trade convoys, spreading chaos where they could. But the new assembly was not defenseless. When the first remnant fleet attacked the colony of Vardesh III, it was not soldiers who rose to defend it. It was the people themselves, united under a new kind of banner. Ships of mixed species, once enemies, fought side by side, not for dominance, but for survival. They called themselves the Custodians, in honor of the Terran who had faced the Dominion's council. And when the battle was over and the Remnant's flagship burned, they sent a message into the void: "We remember." It was unclear if the humans ever heard it, but on that same night, telescopes across the assembly detected something strange. A pulse of light from the edge of the galaxy, a flare so distant it should have been impossible to detect. The signal was faint, fragmented, distorted by time and distance, but one line came through clear. In human language, it read, "We are listening." For weeks, the assembly debated what it meant. Was it a message, a warning, a test, or perhaps simply an acknowledgement that humanity still watched from beyond the reach of any empire's hand? Whatever the truth, it ignited something profound across the stars, a sense of guardianship. The galaxy had nearly destroyed itself once through arrogance and division. None wished to repeat it. Over generations, humanity's legend grew, not as conquerors, but as the invisible architects of peace. Children across dozens of worlds learned the stories of Earth not as myths, but as lessons. How a species born fragile and wild had stared into extinction, and instead of breaking, had risen to define what it meant to be civilized. The humans had shown that true power did not come from dominance or fear, but from the ability to end the cycle of hatred entirely. Yet in the quiet corners of the cosmos, there were still mysteries. Ancient ruins began to hum with energy that matched the harmonic frequencies of the Terran song. Some believed these were remnants of humanity's forgotten technology, machines that could reshape planets or calm stars. Others claimed it was something deeper, that the humans had left pieces of themselves woven into the very structure of space-time, a resonance that would awaken when the galaxy was ready. One evening, on the anniversary of The Silence of Earth, Minister Tala's descendants gathered on the rebuilt capital's highest tower. From there, they looked upon the sky where the human fleet had once hung like a constellation of ghosts. The stars shimmered faintly, as though in remembrance. An old scholar among them recited the final stanza of the Choral of Earth. "When the void remembers our name, it shall not be in fear but in faith. For though the stars forget, the soul endures." And across the galaxy, as if in answer, a ripple of light moved through the night, a synchronized flicker among thousands of stars, brief but unmistakable. For one heartbeat, every world in the assembly saw it, and every being felt it. The humans were not gone. They had never truly left. They were part of the very fabric of the cosmos now, silent, watching, guiding, as they always had. And so it was that the galaxy, once drenched in blood and conquest, learned to speak not with weapons, but with unity. Justice was no longer vengeance, mercy was no longer weakness, and strength was no longer fear. It was the era humanity had dreamed of but never lived to see, the Age of Remembrance. The Empire had tried to erase them, but now every star whispered their name. Humanity. The word itself had become sacred, no longer a species, but an idea, an eternal promise echoing in the silence between worlds.